And welcome once again to Strange Planet. On this episode, near-death experiences and shared death experiences, and how they can be learned and incorporated into our lives here in the physical realm, how these lessons can change people's perspectives and allow them to realize more fulfilled lives. And here to help us along this journey is Dr. Scott Taylor, president of the Expanded Awareness Institute. EAI helps people interested in near-death and shared death experiences explore what that experience means to them and to our culture as a whole. Scott has served as president and executive director of the Monroe Institute. He's been a trainer for the Monroe Institute since 1985. He's an expert in the use of binaural beat technology to achieve and hold expanded states of consciousness. His gift is the ability to make the exploration of the non-physical universe accessible to the curious. Scott is the author and voice of 6 best-selling CDs of guided meditations on near-death experiences in his Into the Light series. He's a spiritual teacher, speaker, researcher on near-death experiences, and he served 2 stints on the board of the International Association for Near-Death Studies and currently serves as co-MC of their international conventions. Scott's first retirement was as faculty member at South Central College in North Mankato, Minnesota, where he mentored small business owners. He's an accomplished business leader and former CEO skilled in a broad range of leadership and business issues. His doctorate is in educational leadership from the University of St. Thomas, and his dissertation topic was Near-Death Experiences, Discovering and Living in Unity. He's passionate about the ancient sport of curling. Having participated in the Olympic trials in 1991, he and his wife make their home in Virginia's beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. Dr. Scott Taylor, welcome to the program. How are you?
I am well, Richard, and thank you for the invitation to come on this show. I have been really looking forward to it.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Let's talk about your.
There is one thing though.
Oh.
You and Harry Potter have the studio under the stairs. I like that. That works for me.
Well, I've actually I moved locations. I'm not literally under the stairs. I'm next to the under the stairs, but my children actually called me Harry Potter. So here we are.
Here we are.
Let's begin with your story, this extraordinary shared. Well, let's start with the definition. I mean, I've talked about it before in the program, but maybe some have not heard about shared death experiences. They know about near-death experiences, but not SDEs. Give us a definition.
Sure. So with a near-death experience, where most people are familiar with that, that's where usually the physical body has been so traumatized that it dies. And the non-physical body leaves, goes out, has an adventure, then somebody back in the physical world, an EMT or somebody, revives the physical body, non-physical body re-inhabits it, and they come back to live in the physical world. So that's a near-death experience. A shared death experience involves no physical trauma. It involves, well, say your bedside with somebody who's making their transition. And when they leave their physical body for the last time, they invite whoever's there to, say, me, invite me to come and go with them on their journey. And so it, by definition, a near-death experience really isn't the final transition. They're very similar. But a shared death experience, there's a person who's really making their exit and somebody else gets to witness it. So they get to feel it, they get to go through and experience everything the person who's in their final transition gets to experience. So it's a true look at what it's like to have, or what it's like for our final transition.
Do you have to be in close proximity to have a shared death experience, or could you be across the country?
That's a good question. And the answer is most of the shared death experiences, 60%, happen at a great distance. there's only about 40% where people are actually bedside or in close proximity. So the answer is yeah, you don't have to be close at all. Um, what we know about shared death experiences is that um, there's some criteria, but the first one is that there's a heart connection between the person who's making the transition and the one who will have the experience of the shared death. And um, and of course, heart knows no time and space. So yeah, if I'm making the transition and my bride is in San Francisco, a long way from here, of course, I could be there like that, invite her to go with me, and ta-da, it it can happen.
So tell us about your shared death experience.
Well, this it takes place in 1981, and I'm in love with a woman who her name is Mary Frances, and Mary Frances and her son Nolan had been out sailing on Lake Washington, which is in there's a lot of Lake Washingtons, but this one is in southern Minnesota. And um, on their way home from that wonderful day of sailing, they're involved in a horrific car accident. And Mary Fran is killed instantly. And Nolan suffers a mortal head wound. And luckily, uh, living in southern Minnesota, the both of them were taken immediately to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. It's one of the best healthcare facilities on the planet. So they were really well taken care of. Um, but it took Nolan 6 days to make his transition. And that becomes important because Mary Fran was one of 9 children. So there were lots of folks, and Nolan was the eldest grandchild. And it took, because there was this 6 day interval, there was plenty of time for all the relatives to come from all over the country to lend their support to Nolan and to hold vigil with him. And that meant that there were brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles, grandparents, friends, neighbors. Um, there were about, I don't know, 40 or 50 people who had come to be with Nolan as he's fighting for his life. So what that meant for us was that Nolan's in a small hospital room, and we divvied up the time, and just two of us at a time would go in with him for a couple hours stint and just be with him. And we know now that um, persons that are in a coma, Nolan never did regain consciousness. Um, and Nolan, um, one of the last things to go is our sense of hearing. And so it was important to be there and to talk to him. And as it turned out, um, my shift was on the morning of the 6th day from 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. in the morning. And I was there with um, Mary Fran's oldest sister, Janny, who was a trained emergency room nurse. And we were there and we did, some cool stuff. We read him stories. We told him about what was going on with all of these people in the waiting room. And in fact, that night, they had the boys in the family had gone on a scavenger hunt, and they had gone through the whole Mayo Hospital and they grabbed the cushions off the couches and took them back to the waiting room so that they could lie down on the floor and be comfortable as they're waiting their turn. So it was kind of a funny story to tell him. Well, anyway, it gets to be about quarter to 5 in the morning, and Jeannie goes to the end of his bed, takes a look at his chart, and looks up at the monitors and goes, "God, we should say our goodbyes." And so we grabbed some chairs and we pulled it up next to Nolan's head, and we told him that he had been a very brave boy, that he had fought so hard to stay with us, be with us here in the physical world. But if his mother should show up, so remember, Mary Fran died 6 days before. If Mary Fran would show up and invite him to go with her, that would be okay, that would be appropriate, and that he should go, and to not worry about us, and to know that we have loved him, and that we um, would always love him, and to just be with him as he's making his transition, that we would be there for him. And by this time, it's now 5 o'clock, and the next shift is coming in, and we go back into the waiting room and grab a couple of those couch pillows and kind of lay down for the rest. Well, it wasn't more than 45 minutes later, Richard, that um, the nurse on the floor came in and said it's time. And so all of us filed into this small hospital room and gathered around his bed. Well, as it just turned out, I was one of the very last people into the room. And so that meant that it was already 4 or 5 deep around his bed. And so I said, well, that's silly. So I went and sat on a windowsill next to Willie, which is Mary Fran's youngest brother. And we just sat and waited. You know, for any of you out there who've done this vigil, I mean, it's at least in Nolan's case, it was very soft, it was very gentle, and I'm sitting there in this windowsill, and really the only thing there was to do was to watch the heart monitor as it's doing its bumpy thing, and it gets quieter and quieter and quieter. And finally, there's that flat line when it does that really ominous tone. Well, when Nolan flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil and scooping Nolan up out of his physical body. And they had this exquisite reunion between the two of them. It was a mother who'd lost her son, you know, in this car accident, and now they're reunited again. And I was surprised because I could feel it. I could feel what was happening between the two of them. And then what surprised me even further was then the two of them turned to me, embraced me, and then the three of us left and went to the light. And I entered into this extraordinary space. It was just exquisite. It was, well, frankly, it's the love of the universe. It's all of a sudden I'm now connected to them. I'm connected to everything that's around me. I'm connected to, all of humanity. It's you you begin to realize that you can never be disconnected from the love of the universe, from the love of God. So we're there in this exquisite unconditional love, and we have time, and we affirmed our affection for each other. We had a chance to say our goodbyes, and we had time just to be with one another in that space until it felt finished. It's an odd thing to say because there wasn't any words for it, like, see you, Scott. It was more um, like it was complete, that we'd created this bond between the three of us, and it was time. And they turned and went further into the light, and I returned to my physical body.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.